Kingdom Come Deliverance is early 2025 Game of the Year, loved by journalists and humans alike. A rare game that manages to please everyone. Now, did KCD match expectations, built on previous behavior promises and the social presence of the Warhorse development and CMs? According to some trusted journalists, this is the anti-woke game for the toxic, yada 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 typical gamers bad, we know the drill. While some have taken a very different stance on it, and yikes. There's something to be said for finding a content creator you can trust, that you agree with or at least believe is reliable. Contrary to unpopular but very loud belief, it is not up to the lying games media to tell you who to trust, who to rely on, and what opinions make you moral, and which make you an istphobe, toxic, bigot, commie, fascist. Frankly, most of you are pretty sick of that sort of moralizing and judgmentalism from people who are on the lowest of high grounds. So how did a game that is mostly well received get blasted on both ends of the ethical journalist spectrum? Expectations? Because this is something that people often don't talk much about, but is vital to success for a franchise or conversely, abject failure. Now, have you ever watched a movie in a franchise and thought, this is decent, but it is clearly nothing like what it is based on? This happens all the time with comics, sci-fi, fantasy, and especially video game movies. Sure, we now have Sonic and Mario embracing video game tropes rather than trying to avoid them, making some of the best moments of those movies. But go back a few years and that's just never the case. Consider Final Fantasy. Spirits Within was an adequate sci-fi film with impressive CGI, great effects, and a shallow environmentalist message. It's basically Avatar, so it could have done well enough. However, one thing it absolutely was not was resembling Final Fantasy. So if you went in expecting Final Fantasy, which you would have considering it was in the title, your expectations were nowhere near met. Following that though, they made Final Fantasy VII Advent Children, which was the opposite. Still, one of the most faithful to the game movies ever made. Rather than being embarrassed, they were making a movie based on a game for little kids. We have a phone playing the victory fanfare, Cloud using Omnislash to beat Sephiroth. Gamey, a bit cheesy, but it's what fans want. It's what is expected. The closer you are to the game, the more a show or a movie will meet expectations and keep the audience happy. How about a game that went out of its way to subvert expectations? Last of Us 2. You play the first game, really grow to like Joel and Ellie, expect you're going to continue that story, and the studio preyed upon expectations of the sequel. We had promo material suggesting this will be a continuation with Joel. This will continue the story. Making us believe those expectations were met was so important to Naughty Dog. They even went through with striking content creators, something many of us consider an ultimate taboo. They wanted us to expect more of the same, but instead, everything was upended in the game, and it ended up becoming one of the most divisive games of all time. While any game can be subject to the curse of not meeting expectations, it almost always is cinematic and story-heavy franchises, which can be severely hindered by going far off the former blueprint. By that I mean, consider something like Castlevania's Symphony of the Night, an amazing game, and Lords of Shadow, also quite good. The expectations of a 2D Metroidvania weren't even close to being met with Lords of Shadow, but it was fine as long as the game was still good, which the sequel proved. Cinematically, Lords of the Shadow kept the gothic architecture, the vampires, the overall aesthetic of the gear and the weapons. It looked and it felt like a Castlevania game. Now, if Lords of Shadow were set in a modern city, and you're a fat barber wielding a bat, and you're killing robots, it would not survive a change in the setting, in the visuals. It would not match the expectations. So did Come 2 match expectations? Well, from audience feedback and maintaining a very high player count, despite being in a time where we have games like Monster Hunter Wilds and Path of Exile 2 and many other games coming out, for a great many people, it seems the answer is yes. It did match expectations. However, imagine if people did not give it a chance. Because while the game may have matched expectations, if you only listened to the journalist coverage of the game, it really felt like it was not going to be an authentic sequel of the first game. So what is the purpose of a games journalist? Information? They provide a check on corporations, giving us information we can use to inform our decisions. The problem is journalists are focusing less and less on this and more on two goals which, in many cases, counter the value they're supposed to have for the consumer. The first is ideology. Video games are a platform or a way to push their religious or political beliefs on other people. The prime focus of everything they do is to find a way in which the game supports or is against their belief system, how to alter or subvert the game if you have some power over it, such as a developer, or to defend and attack the game if you are a consultant or a journalist. This is how we get so many console reviews that spend most of the review talking about politics, how so many gaming articles spend most of their time attacking the groups they have deemed apostates, which generally is gamers who are not buying the slop they are demanding you consider a 10 out of 10. During Hogwarts Legacy, for example, anyone doing a review or just playing the game without talking about social politics or things that are outside of the game was harassed and attacked by the extremist cancel mob. And this isn't just random anonymous people on the internet. This is journalists doing this. This is people with authority, who are backed by corporations, who have access with even bigger corporations. These are people who have power and influence in the game's media, leading attack squads on people who are only playing a video game, who are only reviewing a video game, who are doing nothing to harm anyone else, to even counter their own belief system. All it took was for them to not openly and loudly support their cause, for them to be targeted. People who had never said or supported any political opinion were suddenly swarmed by people who were wishing them death, all at the behest of activists and journalists. The second goal is personal gain. Vacations, trip to Disney World, getting wined and dined by the corporation, or maintaining early access to games or information which gives them a leg up. And for this, they trade their ethics and integrity by acting as PR for major corporations. Think Redfall. Xbox-friendly influencers hyped it up after getting to play a 2-hour demo, pampered and chosen for their lack of critical thinking or ethics. Once people could play it or watch influencers live stream the game, however, all their lies fell apart. Cyberpunk is an even more famous example. While many journalists love to claim the sweet baby Gamergate situation of 2024 caused gamers to turn on them, Cyberpunk eroded far more trust and respect far earlier, as the entire journalist class worked together to sell a game and obscure problems so undeniable and rampant that the game was refunded and even pulled off online storefronts. This was an eye-opener for everyone, as while many gamers might not care about social agendas and things like Gamergate, Cyberpunk was such a massive game, even casual gamers were aware of it and eager for it. And all it took was them playing the game, seeing with their own eyes, realizing the game they were playing was completely different from the lies that the mainstream gaming media concocted. Their coverage made so many interested in finding out why the journalists maliciously lied to them. All this at the same time, they will go on the attack against studios competing against the major AAA entrenched juggernauts. Think about how IGN called Stellar Blade Studio a woman-hating group of incels who had never touched a woman. The day Stellar Blade's embargo dropped, the first thing journalists wanted you to know was about the hard R graffiti in the game, attempting clearly to smear Shift Up as a bigoted studio, all on the hopes that they could mislead the casual games media enjoyer that Stellar Blade hated retards. This is why IGN immediately brings out a KCD2 article about how to be gay in the game. That is what they consider the most important thing, and most likely to create outrage and conflict and drag down the game's image to change what the expectations are for the game. Despite this being ultimately a few minutes of a 50+ hour game that you can avoid entirely by choice, this is the first thing they want you to know about it. On the other extreme, you have counter-journalists, effectively saying the same thing, just for different reasons that end up being the same reason. None of this is about journalism or information, it's about pushing ideology. The point is to reduce an entire game to an often out of context or misrepresented or very small piece of information in the game. This isn't unlike what they did with Mass Effect 1, where outsiders reduced the game to what was less than 1% of the game. And that became such a major talking point, something so important for the game that people outside of the games industry talked about it. And even people who haven't played it know exactly what I mean, despite me not even saying what it was I was talking about. I didn't even say what the Mass Effect controversy was, but let's be honest, decades later, you all still just thought the same thing, right? That is the power of spreading a narrative. That is the power of focusing on a specific thing that can get people very emotional. People seem to often miss the forest for the trees when it comes to why woke, de-slop, propagandist games all fail. If you go to a church service, you expect a sermon. When something's like Twilight, or 50 Shades, or Harlequin romances, these are made all with the idea of objectification and a hatred of men, the celebration and idolatry of the female gaze and gooning femcells. This succeeds because it knows its audience, and matches their expectations of shallow storytelling which portrays men as helpless boy toys in need of a completely unremarkable woman to give their lives meaning. And it does very well. But when you pay to play Veilguard, you expect a dark fantasy RPG. You expect Dragon Age, which it failed to give you. If the third book of Twilight was a sports genre story about getting stronger and bettering yourself through discipline, it would have failed. Not because there's no audience for stories like that. There's plenty of very successful stories about getting stronger, being disciplined. This is a very popular genre, but not Twilight's audience. That's an audience invested in a story about a 100-year man banging teenagers. So why was the lead up to Come 2 so volatile? Well, expect this to be very commonplace in the near future. Ideology has had a steel grip on the industry for the last decade. It's given these people a lot of power, and as DEI and wokeness is expunged, it is going to be flailing very, very hard. At the same time, other ideologies are going to pop up and try to fill the void, to use their position as opposition to the current tyrants to install themselves as the new ones. But it's good that these conversations are happening, and more so can happen. Everyone can say their piece, no matter how you feel about it. It is also good to see what people on our side can say crazy stuff, and yet people are ready to disagree rather than fall to the same tribalism. Because that's a huge part of what makes wokeness so destructive. Nobody can disagree. If you're on that side, you agree with everything. And because nobody can disagree, they can only become more and more radical. It is a good thing for everyone to be able to talk. Censorship's main goal is to protect the indefensible, to allow ideas everyone disagrees with to flourish, and to stifle ideas that everyone supports. Aren't we all sick of being in a world where madness reigns? Everyone knows it, but nobody is allowed to say it? What is best for gaming is freedom. So vigilance will always be needed against unscrupulous governments, big investment firms forcing behaviors, ideological warriors seeking to blacklist, dox, harass, and silence opponents. AAA still holds all of the big franchises we used to love. They ruined all of them in the same way, while every studio is no longer made up of the teams which once produced these masterpieces. Sadly, these franchises are almost all lost. Censorship and interference from consultants, governments, or credit card corporations, this has killed everything. And this continues to kill creativity and the possibility of innovation and breakthrough hits from indies and AA studios is continually at risk. Freedom guarantees we will get games we hate and games we love. And that's how it always was. That's how it was during the golden age of gaming. So, did Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 match expectations? For most it did, but there's a concerted, continual effort from the journalist class to convince you that games like Stellar Blade, Wukong, and Kingdom Come will not match your expectations, while trying to convince you games like Concord and Veilguard will. This is different from trying to convince you a game is good or bad. This is them trying to convince you that a game is something that it is not. And they will continue to lie. They will continue to make mountains of molehills and molehills of mountains. Studios, your PR is atrocious. A community manager is supposed to add value, yet so many go rogue and antagonize your player base. The quality of Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 may be great, but that won't matter if you turn people off before they've even tried it by getting into Twitter fights, fighting with journalists over review scores, snarky telling people not to buy the game, lashing out against people covering the controversial parts of the game. Developers, you do not need to do this. Leave that to us. We are happy to do that on your behalf. Game developers, you are the kings and the lords of this space. Act with some class. Sometimes you gotta let us court jesters be the clowns. You come out, say, we are proud of what we made. We stand by our artistic decisions. Nobody influenced us, and we hope you all enjoy the game. You have made this a success, and we are so happy to keep making more games for you to enjoy. Your business is always wanted. Unless, of course, you support the other side's politician, in which case you can go kill... Hold up. Never mind that last part. You're gonna let the games industry in on a secret that could literally save all of your jobs. Nobody has ever wanted to know who you vote for.